Awesome. All right, Zach, we're back on. You remember where you were at? I was dealing with all this technology madness, so I lost this for a sec.
So this person that I realized I had choosing to be, I didn't like. I mean, I was
And you're referring
obviously
to
an
yourself.
yes, yes. I through my actions, I was an adulterer. I was a liar,
Sure.
and I was splitting myself in these two separate parallel lives, and it was so inauthentic, and I had gotten to this point, and I didn't even know that I'd gotten to this point, and in that in that moment, I realized that all my relationship problems and all the problems I've ever dealt with in my life had one thing in common, and that was me. And up until this point, I never had the had made the choice to look at that. So, um,
Yeah, so through this marital affair, extramarital relationship, as you called it, um, she gets pregnant. This is just a wake up call. Like, oh my God, I've really made shit really complicated for myself.
absolutely. And so through that, I finally let my ego go, and through that, I found the Mankind Project, and that's really where my journey to figure me out started with that, and then the circles of men, and my spiritual path, and through this, when my son Ezekiel, I found that name in meditation. It biblically means God strengthens,
Gotcha.
and it chose that for him. And Ezekiel's mother, she was dealing with pain in this all too, because not only did we have this relationship, and now she's pregnant, and now I'm not there for her because I'm dealing with my other stuff. And the day that the day that Ezekiel was born, Holly was actually out of the country on a trip, so my daughter and I went up and were there when Ezekiel was born, and he stayed with his mother for some time, and the only time I got to spend time with him was going up to her house after she had moved out of the area. So that 4 hour drive alone, because Holly couldn't come because she didn't have time off, was
But
gave me a lot of time to do self work, and gave a lot of opportunities for Holly and I to work on our trust to rebuild, because not only is this a young lady that I had an extramarital affair with, I had a child with this young lady, and now I'm spending a day at a time on my days off going up there at her house without Holly, and it was it was a difficult
sounds
situation for us,
brutal.
trying to co-parent and not having the ability to spend my time with my son without his mother. She was dealing with her own stuff too, and the custody battle ensued. I sold a lot of assets that I had to pay for lawyers to kind of solve this situation, and there was another turning point where Holly and I looked at each other and were like, well, we we want my son, and I was ready to go to war with his mother to make that happen. And then I realized that that wasn't true to me. In my life, I've seen plenty of war, and that's not what I wanted. So
And
I,
Zach, you were also a military vet, I believe.
yes, I did. I did 10 years in the Air Force. After that, I went immediately into being a prison guard. After that, I worked in the jail, and then from there, I went to the police academy.
Gotcha.
I've been a civilian police officer on the roads for 6 years after that.
So,
So
so,
that's
so that
like
yeah, I
that.
was just connecting the dots on the war part. So here you are going into a custody war, and you have a realization like, what? I'm guessing something like, whoa, this doesn't need to be a war. So what
Yep,
was it for you?
it does, and I see so much of that that doesn't need to be like that. So Holly and I, we had made the pact with ourselves and each other. It's like whatever happens next, we are going to show up authentically in a way that we are proud of. The days of the end justifies the means are were over, because all that is right now and the person you are. And if you continue to choose to be in your authenticity at each moment, that's that's the wake up that I
What
had.
do you mean by authenticity? A lot of people don't know what that means, and honestly, in this context, I'm not sure what you mean either.
So to say that, and I've seen how custody battles go. I have one child from my previous marriage, and not to say that it was a custody battle, but I've we've had discussions about that and have butted heads about that. And to know that if we got lawyers and went to court, it's an argument over I'm a better parent than her. So everything comes out like politics, it's mudslinging. Well, did you know when she was this old, she did this? And we've all got things that we've done that we're not proud of. And we chose to stay in a loving space with Ezekiel and Ezekiel's mother and Ezekiel's mother's other children, and to just do this together.
Nice. So the sense, and this is what I teach men a lot who are going through divorce. Like, listen, you might want to get all the money and whatnot, but you're beating the crap out of your child's mother. Think about it that way. How's this going to serve your family? And so it's not so much that in that moment you don't need to assert yourself, but like you said, you don't also need to go to war. So I'm hearing you say your authenticity was honoring this higher priority of who you really are, which is a man of peace and love.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Um,
And when did you get the confidence that you could step into being that authentic man of peace and love versus this dude who you'd been trained for years had to be a tough guy?
um, I don't know that I can tell you the exact moment, because it's a very interesting thing about that is once you realize it, you can't unknow it. So to be able to try to remember what it was like to not be that, I can't do it. I can remember that there
Totally
were
relate. Beautiful set.
critical points that I was outside of that, and that was necessary for my path. And if I had never been outside of it, I would have never been able to recognize what it's like to be inside of it. So it's a little paradoxal on that. But I know after I made that decision that it wasn't going to be a war, and that this was going to be
In
a
the
peace.
custody battle.
Yeah.
And
A love.
had you done the Mankind Project weekend prior to this
Yes.
moment?
Yes, I had done the Mankind Project initiation, and I had staffed one or two times.
And what was there? I think I might have asked you before, but there was a sense that you got from that weekend that you no longer need to hide from who you really were. Was it, and I went through the weekend as well, and I had come through the weekend interestingly enough after doing 15 years with the Men's Leadership Alliance. So it wasn't like this big wake up call for me. It was a powerful experience. But I know most men are coming to that weekend like it's the first time they feel like they can fully, truly be themselves. And a big part of it, and tell me if this was not your experience, was that you're seeing other men do the same. They're pulling off their masks, they're facing parts of themselves that they've hidden from. And then suddenly you're like, holy shit, I can do that too. And I can breathe and I can live free and I can be me instead of this old, suppressed, masked manhood BS. Is that kind of encapsulated somewhat?
No, based on the other men who initiated with me, I was that man you just talked about. I was the first one to stand up. Yes,
Okay,
I've
nice.
out of out of my authenticity. I've done this. I've done this because it was at that point. It's like completely raw. I mean, I would have had the confidence to stop and talk to someone on the street and be like, "Hey, I did this. I," and because there's no hiding it anymore. And once I made that step to tell my wife what had happened, it was so freeing. It was like putting down the
And
chains
again, that was before or
that
after
were holding.
the MKP weekend when you told her?
That was that was before.
Okay. Gotcha. So I
Something
just want
that
to say real quick, like, I love the fact that you were the first one to step out. And you know what? In my weekend, I was too, the first one to go do that work. But afterwards, did you not see other men doing the same thing, like, or something similar where they were stepping into
yes,
parts of them? Yeah. And so I'm just saying that whole environment gives you a permission that we don't tend to have in the general culture to be our full self as men.
yes,
And what I like to say to women too, and I know there's a lot of sensitivity about the Me Too movement and women, is like, we're the dudes who are trying to go deep into the dark parts of ourselves so that we can show up along your side to be in empowered relationship with you. There's none of this one up or one down kind of stuff that we're tracking. We're actually looking to be in relationship with our partners. And I like to say that we are advocates, or at least I know I am an advocate for feminism. Hyperfeminism, etc. I really don't want to go there right now. I do have my comments and critiques on that. Any kind of feminism that bashes men, I will speak up about that. And yes, we need to call out men on bad behavior for sure, but men who are showing up on good behavior, I don't think should be bashed. And I like to say that with everything, all this healing is going to happen with all people at the table. And I know a bit about some of the reconciliation trials that happened in South Africa, which were a huge model for healing of that country. But again, not going to go too far into that. And I want to stay focused on the fact that you had this hero's journey and healing journey when you did your Mankind Project weekend. And then you came out and you didn't have to wear that mask anymore. And talk a little bit about how you were free in that way and how that just changed how you approached your marriage moving ahead and how it
well,
informs you today.
um, in it, in the not wearing the mask and being true, and the decision to no longer go to war, it opened up the line of communication between me and Ezekiel's mother, and through that, um, just to be able to honor the parts of what we had in a relationship and to understand the parts that were outside of my integrity. It was no longer a you did this to me and I did this to you. That victim perpetrator balance fell away, and in the end, she, because of the way her life was going and what she needed to do for her other children, she recognized that Ezekiel was at home with us, and that Holly is his mother just as she is, and we agreed to co-parent, and she's actually asked Holly to adopt Ezekiel, and I promised her that he would always know her as his birth mom. So that in that decision and my truth of I don't need to go to court and try to rake her across the coals to make her sound like the worst person so that I get my son. Letting all of that go, we got exactly what we wanted
Hmm.
without the pain, without the fight. And in this, we've done our personal work and our work together. And Holly puts it beautifully is in choosing each other, we chose ourselves first. And what was true for ourselves was to stay together. We didn't choose to stay together for the kids. We didn't choose to stay together to avoid the shame of divorce and all that. We chose ourselves, and what was true for us was also to stay together. And Ezekiel loves Holly and loves his birth mother, and Holly loves him. To see them together, I've had people say that they would never have guessed that this is what we've been through. And to come out the other side like that, and to be an advocate for the way it can be, versus I've seen so much destruction that comes from stepping outside of your marriage and the disconnect that happens there. Well, I believe that disconnect that happens there starts right here. And if we're disconnected with each other, our relationships outside of ourselves are nothing but a mirror for the relationship we have with ourselves. And it took my son coming into the world in not the normal fashion to really cause me to look at myself. And some of the personal work I've done to address the shame, because shame is a big thing for me, to address that shame, I only chose to work through that shame because I didn't want to project that on him. I did not want to project the the negative feelings of shame from this extramarital relationship or affair when it was coming from a place of shame on this little boy. So if it hadn't been for that, I could have just held on to it my entire life, and it was something I didn't need to do. Looking back on it, I could have made all kinds of choices, but at the time, I felt like I needed to for him. And the universe speaks through him to me a lot
Mm.
because that's when I'm willing to listen.
Wow, beautiful. So, yeah, really touched, man. And you just encapsulated what I essentially teach men in relationship. Find out who you are, be who you are, and then you're going to have a pivot point to know if you even want to be in this marriage or relationship. And it's more like you said, things fall into place when you just become yourself. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to build that trusting yourself when you've had 20, 30, 40 years of actually being separated from yourself, like you talked about. And so that sense of, what I heard in your story was you just got clear on who you were and what you wanted, and that became your higher priority. That became, as you said, your authentic self. And from there, you weren't attached to outcomes per se, and yet how amazing that the outcome that you initially were going to pursue with a custody battle transpired. So for those who are tuning in late, Zach had a extramarital relationship. There was a child that was born out of that, and then I think the most stunning thing that you had told me about, which we just heard from you, was that then your current wife agreed to adopt the child with you. Yeah, just pretty wild, man. And I'm inspired by hearing how you dealt with it and stepped into it, especially considering all your prior training for war as a 10-year vet and the other security positions you held, and as well as being a police officer. And just a quick segue into what do you think that's about with how police officers in this country are in the early 90s, from what I know, the U.S. military was not selling so much surplus equipment to police departments, and that was something that happened over time. And the whole mentality, and again, I have very limited knowledge, and tell me if I'm off base here, of confrontation, war, militarization. And I know there are some departments where they're learning communication skills, but I'm focusing on that part of when an individual knows that that's part of his weaponry, like his ability to communicate, his ability or her ability to talk people down, etc. Any just quick thoughts on the war
Yes.
stance? And there's got to be self protection. I get that, versus the understanding that communication can actually do a lot that a gun can't.
Well, it's something that one of my old supervisors had told me early on in my career. It's like, as a cop, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And there are many different ways to deal with something. And um, I've always been a proponent of that balance once I started waking up to it. I mean, sure, early on I joined the military right out of high school. I wanted to go out and kick ass and save the world. And seeing what I've seen, I made my decision to get out of the military because I was tired of the idea of us not handling our backyard before we go over in somebody else's. So that's why I chose to get out
Nice.
and look at things on the home front. And as far as the militarization of police, I mean, there's a need for every tool. And when if the only tool you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And that may be part of the problem perceived out there.
And so, with
And
that said, is your perception that a lot of departments are not, quote unquote, equipping officers with the power of communication skills and how to work with people in that capacity? Or maybe they introduce it as a 1 or 2 day workshop, but it's not something that's part of the culture of the department. And I know every department's different. And
every department is different, and I've the majority of my career has been with small departments. I was a rural deputy out on the Eastern Plains, and then I worked for two small towns, and so what I've seen is it is very where I've worked was very community oriented. I mean, I speaking to people is our first and foremost, and that's what I, as a field training officer, that's what I train people, and that's what I was trained for. I've gone through CIT training, which is crisis intervention, and that's to deal with people in crisis to avoid these
escalations.
escalations. Yeah, needless escalations. I mean, sometimes we may need to go up here, but don't lead with that.
Yeah. So I don't want to be naive here, but let me know. I'm just throwing shit out here. One of the things I teach men in relationship with an aggressive or maybe verbally abusive partner, and often I'm hearing a lot of guys saying I can never be enough. I talked to a guy yesterday. He said, "Yeah, I would do 9 out of 10 things, and all she would do was bash me for that one thing I didn't do." So I'm getting to the point here. I'll coach guys and I'll say strong shield, but open heart. And in this case, maybe open mind. And so when I think of strong shield, I'm like, yep. I mean, I've never been a police officer, but I'm just trying to tap into an instinct. And if I'm completely off pace here and clueless, call me out. But just that sense of strong shield, like, yeah, I got to know where my weapons are, my physical weapons. I got to be tracking this guy, his physical weapons. And I need open mind to also be in this space of like, hey, right now I'm just talking to this guy. There's no need to grab anything or do anything aggressive, but I need to be ready to move at a snap. And in relationship, it's kind of like, it looks like, no, sorry, you can't talk to me like that. You can't bash me. So anyway, just a quick parallel. It can be. Let me know your thoughts on that.
I'd say
That
that
strong shield, open mind kind of thing. Like the
I
ability
would
to
say
hold both is so powerful, I think, for a man. And I'll tell you about a Maasai story in a second.
so. Yeah, that's 100% accurate because
Okay,
the way
cool.
so I my chosen profession is a law enforcement officer. My identity is not I am a cop. And early on, I mean, I my identity was I am a soldier, I am a prison guard, I am a father, I am me, and all of those other things are parts of my life, but they're not my identity. And it
I'm hearing you say
not
access your humanity, who you are.
absolutely. And what's going on right now, what I it's like it's a lack of personal connection. And it's a lack of personal connection with yourselves because with ourselves, we're going to use I statements is if we are not connected with ourselves, we can't be connected with anyone else. And if I identify as my identity, I am a cop, then I disown every part of me that is not a cop.
And then also, if you're trying to work with somebody who's hyped up, if you're not connected to yourself and your own center and your own sovereignty and your own ability to your own self mastery, well, what are you tracking? You're going off this crazy shit that's happening out there with a person who's in front of you. Oh, they go to scratch their ear. You think they're reaching for something
Exactly.
instead of tracking like, okay, I'm watching them, strong shield, open mind. Okay, I'll take out the dude if I need to, but I'm watching. And that's a tough moment, man. Have you ever been in that moment where you're like, fuck, do I? Yeah. I mean, there's no thinking. It's just bam. And that's where the crazy parts happen.
I have. I've been into I everybody knows what tunnel vision is, and getting into that, it's almost emotional tunnel vision
Right.
where all you see and feel is this instead of opening it up.
So it's almost like police officers need training. It's essentially crisis training. When you feel like you're under threat, how do you keep your head?
Um,
I'm just saying in general. I'm not necessarily.
uh,
I mean, if you got a hit on that for you, but I'm just saying that that seems to be so important for police officers. Like when you're in the heat and you're in it. How do you keep your head? How do you hone that instinct of knowing when to pull out your weapons and when not to? I mean, it's almost like you can train and train and train, and you just have to have life experience, I imagine, in it.
you have to know yourself first, and Sun Tzu in the Art of War talks about that. And as if you know your enemy and don't know yourself, it doesn't matter how many battles you win, you'll always lose the war.
Yeah,
Knowing yourself and knowing your enemy, no matter what happens to you, you're victorious.
yeah, yeah. I hear that. Well, listen, we're about 45 minutes in, Zach. It's been awesome to be here with you, and I'm thinking, we should do this again when we have more stable Wi-Fi. We'll see what the rebroadcast looks if it got interrupted. Um, Anything else you want to just speak to in the next minute or so? I heard you speak briefly. We didn't want to go too into the whole George Floyd thing. Excuse me, and I don't mean to say George Floyd thing. I mean, this really sensitive, horrible situation where George
Well,
Floyd's life was taken.
that's that's one symptom of everything that we see. This isn't all about that young man. What happened to him is a tragedy. I believe all life is precious. And I wasn't there, so to speak on that specifically may be inappropriate. What I see from my truth as a man and as a human being looking at this, like I said before, these are all symptoms of a lack of personal connection. One of the men I've done work with in the Mankind Project, he always talks about PC, and he's like, I'm not talking about political correctness. I'm talking about personal connection. Because if racism is a thing for you or anyone else, there's a lack of personal connection. And this is just as an example. If a white guy has a problem with another man because of his skin color, or vice versa, there is a lack of personal connection right there. Because if you were personally connected with that individual, skin color wouldn't matter. If someone out there is triggered for the fact that you, Stuart, are interviewing a white cop who just happens to shave his head, um,
Two guys
and
shave their head.
oh yeah, right, we're both. If someone feels that way, then I would judge that's a lack of personal connection because if they knew
Yeah.
me, that wouldn't be an issue. So what we have all over is symptoms of a lack of personal connection, and it's no surprise when us as human beings in the age we're in, there's a lack of connection to ourselves.
Yeah, and the word that keeps coming to me is dehumanizing, and I've experienced this and heard this. It's very easy to dehumanize somebody from a mile away, from 1,000 feet away, from 20 feet away, but 3, 4 feet away, not as easy to dehumanize, and yet it happens often. And just a simple question: How are you? To create that connection that you're talking about. And with social media, a lot of dehumanizing happening where people are hiding behind screens, and it ain't a good thing. But I think we could talk much longer about this. But I just want to say thanks, Eric, for being with me today, and I think there's more to talk about in the future for sure.
Absolutely.
So thanks again. And for anybody who's tuned in, I'm Stuart Matola, men's relationship coach. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to my YouTube channel to the lower right there. If you're interested in learning more about my work, check out stuartmatola.com. My name is spelled to the lower left there. Thanks so much, Zach, for being with us. And until next time, have an amazing day. Bye.
Take care, brother.